October 29, Detroit, Michigan. The champagne glass shattered against the podium with a sound that could have been celebration or execution. Sloane Westbrook's manicured hands still gripped the stem Veuve Clicquot, dripping down Italian marble like blood from a wound. Her smile was the kind that cut without apologizing. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Detroit's finest innovation. 50 executives in $1,000 suits turned their heads in perfect synchronization, a choreographed ritual of corporate cruelty. The quarterly innovation showcase had become Sloane's favorite theater, a stage where Titan Core Energy's elite paraded their wealth like peacocks displaying plumage. Tesla Model S sedans gleamed in premium spots. A BMW i8 caught the afternoon sun throwing light across asphalt that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. Someone had arrived in a Mercedes EQS, the kind of electric vehicle that whispered power instead of shouting it. But Sloane's attention had fixed on the corner of the lot where rust met shame. The Ford F-150 looked like it had survived a war and lost. Blue paint faded to the color of old bruises. Corrosion spread across the hood like a disease-eating metal, the way time eats memory. The passenger door hadn't closed properly in what looked like decades. A weathered tarp covered the truck bed, hiding something that might have been an old generator, or might have been nothing worth hiding at all. Does it run on prayers or food stamps? The laughter came in waves, 50 voices finding humor in the distance between their lives and someone else's struggle. Phones rose, cameras capturing the moment for social media immortality. Trevor Nash stood at Sloane's right shoulder, his smile sharp enough to draw blood, his Harvard MBA and 15 years of corporate ladder climbing evident in the way he watched the humiliation unfold with professional appreciation. 30 feet away, invisible in gray coveralls that might as well have been camouflage, Garrett Sullivan felt every eye slide toward him and then away the way people's gazes avoided homeless men on street corners. 6 years. 6 years of pushing a mop across floors that cost more than his entire apartment. 6 years of emptying trash cans for people who had never learned his name, never wondered about the calloused hands that cleaned their toilet. It's never questioned why a man his age would spend his nights scrubbing the same marble lobby over and over like Sisyphus with a bucket. Sloane's voice cut through the October air with the precision of a scalpel. "That is your truck, isn't it? The vintage model?" More laughter. Someone in the back started a slow clap that died after 3 beats, killed by its own awkwardness. Garrett's hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken in 22 years, not since the last time he'd held Vivienne's hand in that hospital room, felt her pulse grow weaker under his thumb, heard her whisper words that became commandments. "Don't let them bury it. Promise me." The truck sat in the corner like an accusation rust, and all carrying a secret worth $2 billion under a tarp that had seen better decades. Every scratch on that paint was a map of the years since Vivienne died. Every dent was a memory of the nights he'd worked on the reactor while Harper slept in the marsh seat, too young to understand why her father lived in parking lots and storage units instead of houses with white picket fences. "You want to hear it run?" The laughter stuttered, stopped. Sloane raised an eyebrow, champagne halfway to lips painted the color of arterial blood. Trevor's hand landed on Garrett's shoulder with the weight of assumption, the pressure that suggested retreat wasn't optional. "Gary, maybe you should just..." But Garrett was already walking. The crowd parted. The way crowds always parted for the invisible confusion, replacing amusement on faces that had forgotten how to be surprised. Whispers started up behind him, like static on a dead channel. "What's he doing? Is he serious? This should be good." The truck door opened with the squeal of hinges that needed oil, a sound Garrett had refused to fix because it reminded him of the morning Vivienne brought Harper home from the hospital 3 months old, and perfect the future they dreamed about condensed into 7 pounds of possibility. The driver's seat welcomed him like an old lover, leather cracked from years of Michigan summers. In winters, the dashboard faded, but familiar. The smell hit him immediately. Motor oil and old leather, yes, but underneath barely detectable, after all this time, the ghost of Vivienne's perfume. Gardenia, and something else. Something that was just her, the scent that used to fill their apartment before the lawsuits, before the cancer, before everything turned to ash. "I'm sorry. I tried to stay invisible, but they won't let me." The key turned in the ignition with the smooth certainty of a prayer answered. For a moment, suspended between past and present, Garrett closed his eyes and saw Vivienne's face the night they first got the reactor running. In their apartment, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that believed the world could be saved, If you just worked hard enough, cared enough, refused to give up. The engine didn't cough, didn't wheeze, didn't make any of the sounds that 22 years and rust and abandonment should have earned. It sang. The sound rolled across the parking lot like distant thunder, a deep harmonic that shouldn't have existed outside theoretical physics papers and fever dreams. Pure, perfect, alive. The frequency vibrated in chest cavities, made teeth hum with resonance that human ears weren't designed to process. This wasn't combustion. This was something else entirely, something that existed in the space between what was possible and what was allowed. 50 people went silent as graves. Garrett revved the engine once, twice, 3 times. Each pulse of sound filled the air with impossible music frequencies that made the heart race and the mind question everything it knew about engines and energy and the fundamental laws that supposedly governed how machines worked. The sound didn't fade. It built on itself, creating harmonics that shouldn't have been possible, waves of acoustic energy that felt less like noise and more like proof of something miraculous. Sloane's champagne flute slipped from her fingers. Crystal met asphalt with a sharp crack, a sound almost lost in the reactor's hum. 45 years in the energy industry. She knew engines the way surgeons knew anatomy, could identify a Ferrari by sound alone, had sat through demonstrations of cutting-edge propulsion systems from every major defense contractor in the country. Nothing sounded like this. Nothing could sound like this. Dr. Nina Brennan pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart synchronize with the reactor's rhythm, her engineer's mind already cataloging impossibilities. Magnetic resonance, plasma containment, energy recapture at efficiencies that violated every thermodynamic model she'd studied at Caltech. The red hair inherited from her Scottish grandmother seemed to stand on end, static electricity or recognition, or both. Trevor Nash's smile had vanished, completely replaced by something that looked almost like fear, the primal response of a predator realizing it might be prey. Garrett killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute, the kind of quiet that came after revelations. He stepped out of the truck, closed the door gently, and walked back toward the building without looking at anyone. Gray coveralls brushed against executives in suits worth more than some people's cars. Calloused hands hung at his sides. Hands that belonged to someone who had worked his whole life, who had built things, who had loved and lost and survived in ways these people would never understand. Sloane's voice chased him across the parking lot, all the mockery stripped away, replaced by something raw and hungry. Wait, what was that? What kind of engine? But Garrett was already gone, disappearing through the glass doors, returning to his mop and his bucket and his invisibility. Behind him, the crowd stood frozen, staring at the rusted F-150 like they had just witnessed a miracle. Because they had. They just didn't know it yet. 2 in the morning. Sloane lay in her penthouse bedroom, 40 floors above Detroit, staring at the ceiling, listening to that sound replay in her mind over and over, like a song she couldn't forget. The city spread below her windows, a grid of lights that marked the slow heartbeat of American manufacturing's corpse Detroit, rising and falling and rising again, like a boxer who refused to stay down. That engine, that impossible engine, she'd been around vehicles her whole life. Robert Westbrook had built Titan Core from a small auto parts manufacturer into a renewable energy giant, dragging his daughter through garages and factories from the time she could walk. She'd grown up surrounded by the smell of gasoline and the roar of combustion engines, learned to identify machinery by sound before she learned to read. Every machine had a signature, a fingerprint, the cough of a cold start, the growl of acceleration, the whine of gears engaging. After 45 years, Sloane could catalog most engines by their acoustic profile, the way bird watchers identified species by song. That smooth, perfect, almost musical tone was not something any machine should be able to make. It violated principles. It suggested impossibilities. Her phone lay on the nightstand screen, dark. 3:17 in the morning. Trevor would answer on the third ring, voice thick with sleep, already calculating what this meant for his position. She reached for it anyway. Trevor's voice came through fog thick and wary. Sloane, it's 3 in the morning. I need you in my office tomorrow morning. 6 sharp. What? Why I need everything you can find on Garrett Sullivan. Employment history, background check, previous addresses, education records. I want to know where he came from, where he worked before, what he did before he started pushing a mop around my building. Silence stretched across the line long enough that she could hear Trevor breathing, hear him calculating, adjusting, recalibrating his approach to whatever game he thought they were playing. You want me to investigate the janitor? Did you hear that engine today? Yeah, it was different, I guess. Old truck probably has some custom work, different. Trevor, I've heard engines from Ferrari, from Lamborghini, from military jets that can break the sound barrier. I've sat in on demonstrations of cutting-edge propulsion systems from every major defense contractor in the country. She sat up in bed, adrenaline burning through exhaustion like acid through rust. I have never heard anything like that. Not once, not ever. She could hear Trevor processing on the other end of the line wheels, turning strategies, forming the Harvard MBA, putting pieces together in patterns that served his own interests first, in truth distant second. 6 a.m. My office. Don't be late. The line went dead. Sloan set the phone down and lay back, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Garrett Sullivan's face as he walked back into the building. No triumph, no satisfaction, no revenge, just sadness, like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Trevor was waiting in her office at 5:45, which meant he'd probably been there since 5:30, preparing his report, arranging his presentation, making sure every detail aligned with whatever narrative would best serve his survival. A thin folder sat on her desk, thicker than it should have been for a janitor, which already told Sloan everything and nothing. She picked it up. Coffee grew cold in her other hand as a morning light strengthened outside her window. Detroit waking up to another day of pretending it was the city it used to be. Garrett Sullivan, 54 years old, born in Detroit to working-class parents, father a mechanic at Ford's River Rouge plant, mother a nurse at Detroit General. Bachelor's degree in nuclear physics from MIT, master's from Stanford, PhD from Caltech. Sloan stopped reading. Her coffee cup made a sharp sound against the desk, ceramic on wood, a punctuation mark in the silence. Wait, MIT, Stanford, Caltech. Trevor leaned forward in his chair, and for the first time since she'd known him, something that might have been genuine surprise crossed his face instead of the calculated expressions he wore like masks. It gets better. After Caltech, he spent 15 years at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, worked on propulsion systems for deep space missions, published 47 papers, won 3 major awards. The guy was a rising star. There was talk he was being considered for a division director. Something cold crept up Sloan's spine, the kind of cold that came when pieces started fitting together in ways you didn't want them to. Then what the hell is he doing mopping my floors? That's where it gets strange. Trevor pointed at the folder with one manicured finger. About 22 years ago, he just disappears, leaves NASA, drops off the grid completely. No publications, no patents, no employment records. Nothing. It's like he ceased to exist. People don't just disappear. He did, for 16 years. Then 6 years ago, he shows up here, applies for a janitorial position with a resume that lists him as a high school dropout with no work experience. A fake resume. Whoever did his background check didn't dig very deep, or they didn't care. Trevor shrugged, the gesture of a man who understood that thoroughness was expensive and janitors were disposable. Who investigates janitors, right? Sloan stared at the folder. A NASA engineer, a propulsion specialist, a PhD from Caltech, hiding in her building for 6 years, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, walking past her every morning, cleaning her office every night, carrying the weight of everything her father had done. And she'd never even learned his name. The question wasn't just why. The question was, what else was he hiding? Trevor reached into his briefcase and pulled out a printout, an old newspaper article from the Detroit Free Press dated January 2007. The paper was yellowed at the edges from 22 years of digital storage ink, faded but still readable. There's one more thing. I found this from right before Sullivan disappeared from NASA. The headline made Sloan's blood run cold. Physicist's wife dies after long battle with cancer, lawsuit against energy company, dismissed same week. Below it, a photograph. Garrett Sullivan looking younger, thinner, his eyes hollow with grief that looked like it went down to bone. He stood beside a woman in a hospital bed. She was smiling despite the tubes in her arms, despite the shadows under her eyes that spoke of months of treatment and pain and the slow surrender that cancer demanded. The woman was beautiful. Dark hair against white pillows. High cheekbones that illness couldn't diminish. intelligence radiating from her expression even through the haze of medication. She was holding Garrett's hand like she would never let go. Her name was Vivian Sullivan. She had been a nuclear physicist. She had been Garrett's wife for 6 years. She had died at 44 years old, and the company she and Garrett had been suing was Titan Core Energy. Sloan read the article 3 times each pass, making her stomach tighten like a fist. The details were sparse but damning. Garrett and Vivian Sullivan had developed some kind of revolutionary energy system. They'd approached Titan Core under Robert Westbrook's leadership for funding and partnership. A dispute had arisen. Patents had been filed. Lawsuits had followed. The Sullivans lost. Vivian died the same week their final appeal was dismissed. And then Garrett disappeared from public life entirely. The patents they were fighting over. Where are they now? Trevor's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes, caution maybe, or calculation. I'd have to check the archives. Check them today. I want to see every patent my father acquired around that time. Every legal filing, every internal memo, everything. Sloan Trevor hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sloan could see him weighing loyalty against self-preservation, truth against survival. Are you sure you want to dig into this? Your father's been dead for 3 years. Whatever happened between him and this Sullivan guy, it was 22 years ago. Ancient history. That engine I heard yesterday isn't ancient history. Sloan stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Detroit, the city her father had helped power the empire he'd built on foundations she was only beginning to question. That sound was something new, something impossible. And if Garrett Sullivan has been sitting on technology like that for 22 years, I need to know why. And I need to know what my father had to do with it. Trevor was quiet for a long moment, the silence of a man who understood that some doors once opened led to places you couldn't return from. I'll pull the files, but Sloan, some doors, once you open them, you can't close again. Get me the files, Trevor. He nodded and left the office. Sloan stood at the window, watching the sun rise over a city that had once been the manufacturing heart of America. A city that had fallen, risen, fallen again. A city built on the backs of people who worked with their hands, who built things, who created value that others profited from. A city where a brilliant physicist could become invisible simply by putting on gray coveralls and picking up a mop. She thought about Garrett Sullivan's face when he stepped out of that truck, the sadness in his eyes, the weight on his shoulders. She thought about her father, dead now, buried in a marble mausoleum that cost more than most people's houses. And she thought about the sound of that engine, that impossible, beautiful sound that haunted her dreams and made her wonder for the first time in her life what else she didn't know about the empire she'd inherited. The memory came unbidden, rising through layers of time like a body floating to the surface of dark water. 2003. A lab smaller than most people's bedrooms, tucked into a converted warehouse in southwest Detroit. Garrett Sullivan, 28 years old, still believed the world rewarded brilliance and punished greed. Vivian stood beside him, 26 and radiant, in the way people are radiant when they think they're going to change the world. The prototype sat on a workbench between them, ugly and beautiful, the way all revolutionary technology is ugly and beautiful function, stripped of aesthetics, purpose, naked and unashamed. The Helios reactor isn't about creating energy from nothing. That's impossible. Vivian's voice carried the certainty of someone who understood thermodynamics the way poets understood metaphor. It's about respect. Respecting the energy that already exists, capturing what would otherwise be lost, treating waste as opportunity. Garrett adjusted a coupling, his hands steady despite the coffee he'd been living on for 3 days straight. Turning waste into wealth. Vivian smiled the smile that had made him propose 6 months after they met at a physics conference in Boston. The universe doesn't have a scarcity problem, Garrett. It has a wisdom problem. We throw away more than we use. Helios changes that. They kissed over the prototype, two people who believed that intelligence and persistence could overcome money and power, that the arc of history bent toward justice if you just pushed hard enough. 6 months later, they walked into Robert Westbrook's office. 2004. The office occupied the top floor of Titan Core's headquarters, all glass and steel, and the kind of expensive minimalism that announces success without needing to speak. Robert sat behind a desk made from reclaimed Detroit factory floor, a statement about heritage and renewal that cost more than irony should cost. 62 years old, silver hair, smile like a shark's old teeth in hunger. Revolutionary. I want to partner with you. Garrett felt Vivian's hand tighten on his arm, hope and caution, fighting for dominance. We want to help people, bring clean energy to everyone who needs it. Robert's smile widened. Of course. That's exactly what Titan Core stands for. Garrett would remember that smile later in courtrooms and depositions, remember it and understand that sharks showed their teeth for a reason. 2006. The courtroom smelled like furniture polish and crushed dreams. Titan Core's lawyers attacked with the precision of surgeons and the mercy of executioners. The Sullivans signed confidentiality agreements. These patents belonged to Titan Core. Garrett stood fists clenched, watching 18 years of work evaporate into legal arguments and procedural technicalities. We didn't sign anything. They tricked us into. The judge's gavel came down like a guillotine. Without original documents, I have to rule in favor of Titan Core. Vivian sat beside him, a scarf covering hair that chemotherapy had stolen dark circles under her eyes that spoke of pain, management, and failed treatments. Stage 3 breast cancer. The diagnosis had come a year into the lawsuits, right when they needed to choose between legal fees and medical bills, right when the universe demonstrated that it had no sense of fairness or timing or mercy. October 2006. Vivian sat in the oncologist's office, hand pressed to her belly, 7 months pregnant and dying by degrees. The chemotherapy would harm the baby. We recommend waiting until after delivery. Garrett's throat felt like broken glass. And if we wait, the doctor's expression said everything her words didn't. The cancer is aggressive. Waiting 3 months. Vivian's hand found his grip stronger than it should have been. I'll live long enough to meet our daughter. That's all I need. January 2007. Harper Sullivan was born at 3:47 in the morning, 7 pounds 6 ounces of perfection wrapped in possibility. Vivian held her despite the exhaustion, despite the pain that radiated from her bones like heat from a reactor core. She looks like you. Dark hair, brown eyes. Garrett smoothed his daughter's hair with one trembling finger. She'll be brilliant like you. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper, strength fading like a radio signal moving out of range. Promise me. Don't let them bury Helios. Promise me Harper grows up in a world with clean energy, the world we dreamed about. I promise. April 2007. The hospital room had become Garrett's world dimension, shrinking to the space between Vivian's bed and the window that overlooked a parking lot 3 floors down. Harper slept in a bassinet at her mother's side, 3 months old, unaware that her world was about to collapse. Vivian was skeletal now, cancer having consumed everything except will. Her voice came in fragments, sentences broken by the effort of breathing. Don't let them bury it. The reactor. Our work. Promise me. We lost. The patents are just paper. The knowledge is in your head. In the truck, keep it running. One day, someone will see. One day, Harper will understand. She looked at their daughter one last time, brown-eyed. Eyes meeting brown eyes, a connection that transcended words. Love you, baby girl. 6 hours later, Vivian Sullivan was gone, and Garrett was alone with a 3-month-old daughter and a promise that weighed more than grief. 3 days later, the files arrived at Sloan's office in a banker's box that looked too heavy for its size. Trevor brought them himself, carrying the weight with both hands, his expression carefully neutral, in the way that meant he'd read everything inside and understood exactly what it meant. These are from your father's private archives, the stuff that wasn't digitized. The stuff that wasn't supposed to exist. Sloan lifted the lid with hands that wanted to shake but refused. Inside were documents yellowed with aged legal papers in file folders organized with her father's characteristic precision, patent applications stamped and annotated internal memos, written in Robert Westbrook's unmistakable handwriting, cold, precise, businesslike. The first document was a letter from Garrett and Vivian Sullivan dated 22 years ago, addressed to Robert Westbrook, CEO of Titan Core Energy. The handwriting was careful, hopeful, the penmanship of people who still believed in fairness. Dear Mr. Westbrook, we are writing to propose a partnership that we believe could revolutionize the energy industry. Over the past 12 years, my wife and I have developed a breakthrough in fusion technology, a compact reactor system capable of generating clean, sustainable power with zero emissions and virtually unlimited fuel supply. We have attached preliminary specifications and test results. As you will see, our prototype has demonstrated continuous operation for over 2,800 hours without external fuel input. We believe this technology could eliminate dependence on fossil fuels within a generation. We are seeking a partnership with Titan Core Energy to bring this technology to market. We believe your company's expertise in renewable energy combined with our technical innovations could change the world. We look forward to your response. Sincerely, Dr. Garrett Sullivan. Vivian Sullivan. Sloan stared at the letter at the hope embedded in every carefully chosen word, the naive belief that innovation mattered more than capital, that brilliance could negotiate with power from a position of equality. She pulled out the next document, a memo from Robert Westbrook to his legal team, dated 6 months after the Sullivan's letter. Sullivan Fusion patents acquired. Total cost $3.2 million in legal fees. Settlement with Sullivan's $0. Their lawyers withdrew when they couldn't afford to continue. Technology assessment, potentially revolutionary, but current prototypes unreliable. Our engineering team has been unable to replicate results. The Sullivans apparently kept critical components undocumented, stored in their heads, not on paper. Recommendation: bury the patents. Prevent competitors from developing similar technology. If we can't use it, no one can. Note: Vivian Sullivan died April 14th. Garrett Sullivan has disappeared. No further legal action expected. Sloan read the memo 3 times, then 4. Each pass felt like swallowing glass-sharp edges, cutting all the way down. Her father had stolen technology from a dying woman and her grieving husband, had buried it in corporate archives, had used legal warfare to crush 2 people who just wanted to change the world. And then he'd gone home to his mansion and slept soundly because that's what powerful people did. They took what they wanted and called it business. There was more in the box. Patent filings with the Sullivans' names crossed out and replaced with Titan Core Engineering Department. Assessment reports from company scientists who couldn't make the reactor work because they didn't have the full design, only the pieces Robert's lawyers had managed to extract through litigation and intimidation. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in her father's distinctive script. Sullivan problem resolved. Technology secured. They'll never recover. Sloan sat down, legs suddenly unable to support her weight. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the box of evidence, at the documentation of her family's sins, at the foundation her entire life had been built upon. She thought about Garrett Sullivan pushing that mop across her lobby floor, invisible, forgotten, working in the building of the company that had destroyed his life. 6 years. 6 years he'd been here, walking past her every morning, cleaning her office every night, carrying the weight of everything her father had done. And she'd never even learned his name. Trevor's voice broke through her thoughts, careful and calculated. "What do you want to do?" Sloan looked up. Her face was pale, her eyes wet with tears she didn't try to hide. "I want surveillance footage. Every camera in the parking lot. I want to see what he does with that truck when no one's watching." Trevor hesitated, and she could see him weighing the request against whatever remained of his conscience. Whatever small piece of him still understood the difference between ambition and atrocity. "Do it." The footage arrived that evening. Sloan locked her office door and watched alone the city lights of Detroit spreading below her window like a circuit board, each light a home, a life, a story she would never know. The first video showed Garrett arriving at work at 5:30 in the morning, parking the F-150 in the far corner of the lot, same spot every day for 6 years. Nothing unusual. A man going to work. Invisible. The second video showed him leaving at 11 p.m., 3 hours after his shift ended. But he didn't go straight to his truck. Instead, he walked to the bed, pulled back the tarp, and opened a panel on the generator that wasn't really a generator. Sloan leaned closer to the screen, fingers gripping the desk edge hard enough to hurt. Garrett was working. Checking gauges, adjusting connections, monitoring readings on a handheld device that looked like something from a research laboratory, not a parking lot. His movements were precise, practiced, economical. The movements of an engineer, not a janitor. This wasn't casual maintenance. This was science. She fast-forwarded through weeks of footage, same pattern every night. Garrett stayed late, worked on the reactor for 2 or 3 hours, then drove home. Nobody noticed, nobody cared. He was just the janitor. Then she found it, a clip from 11 days ago. Garrett disconnected what appeared to be the main power coupling, a thick cable that ran from the reactor to the truck's electrical system. He stepped back, consulted his handheld device, made some kind of calculation or decision. Then he started the engine. The reactor ran with no power coupling connected, no external energy source, no fuel input that the cameras could detect. It ran for 10 minutes as that same impossible sound filling the empty parking lot before Garrett shut it down, reconnected the coupling, and drove away. Sloan paused the video. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to set down her coffee cup, the liquid sloshing onto paper she no longer cared about. A fusion reactor that runs without external connections, that recycles its own energy. That sounds like nothing else on Earth. She thought about her father's memo cold and certain technology secured. They'll never recover. But Garrett had recovered. He'd spent 22 years perfecting what her father had tried to bury, working nights in parking lots, raising a daughter alone, keeping Vivian's dream alive in the bed of a rusted truck. And now he was driving it around in plain sight, hiding where no one would think to look, waiting for what Sloan didn't know. But she was about to find out. The next morning, she called Garrett into her office. He came still wearing his gray coveralls, hands rough from 6 years of cleaning supplies and hard work. He stood near the door like a man ready to flee at any moment, shoulders tense, eyes wary. Sit down. Garrett didn't move, a statue in gray. Her voice came out softer than she intended, almost gentle, the tone of someone who knew she was standing on the edge of something that couldn't be uncrossed. Please sit down. Slowly, carefully, like a wild animal deciding whether to trust. Garrett lowered himself into the chair across from her desk. His back stayed straight. His shoulders stayed tense. A man who had learned to expect the worst and was rarely disappointed. Sloan studied him for a long moment. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the hands that had built revolutionary technology and now spent their days scrubbing floors. The distance between who he was and who he'd been forced to become. I did some research on you. She kept her voice neutral, professional, the CEO conducting an employee review. MIT, Stanford, Caltech, NASA. You were a propulsion engineer, a nuclear physicist, one of the best in the country from what I can tell. Garrett's expression didn't change, face carved from stone. That was a long time ago. Not that long. 22 years isn't ancient history. Sloan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, the posture of someone trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces didn't fit the way they should. You could have worked anywhere. SpaceX would have hired you in a heartbeat. Boeing, Lockheed. You could have started your own company. Why are you here, Garrett? Why are you pushing a mop around my building? I needed a job. You needed to hide. Sloan's voice sharpened slightly, the executive cutting through bullshit to find truth. You're hiding something. That truck of yours. That engine. I've heard a lot of machines in my life. I've never heard anything like that. For the first time, something flickered in Garrett's eyes. A warning, maybe. Or a memory. Or both. It's just an old truck. Then you won't mind selling it to me. I'll give you $50,000. Cash. Today. More than that truck is worth by any measure. Garrett shook his head slowly, the gesture of a man who had been asked this question before and had his answer ready. It's not for sale. 100,000. No. 200,000. Sloan's voice hardened, the CEO who wasn't used to hearing the word no. Garrett for a rusted Ford with a weird engine. Nobody says no to that. I'm saying no. Sloan stood up and walked around her desk, stopping a few feet from where Garrett sat, close enough to see the pulse in his neck. The tension in his arm, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with age. $500,000. Final offer. $500,000 for a truck that Blue Books at less than 2,000. Garrett rose slowly to his feet. He was taller than Sloan remembered, his presence larger somehow, in the confined space of the office, filling the room with something that felt like grief and fury mixed together until they became indistinguishable. You really don't understand, do you? His voice was quiet but carried weight, the weight of 22 years, the weight of loss that never healed. You see that truck and you think money. You think opportunity. You think asset to be acquired. But that's not what it is. He took a step closer. Sloan held her ground, but something in her chest tightened, recognition or fear or both. That truck is all I have left of my wife. Every time I turn that key, I hear her voice. Every mile I drive, I feel her beside me. You can't buy that, Ms. Westbrook. Not for $500,000, not for $500 million, not for everything your father stole from us. The words landed like blows, each one precise, each one finding the soft places between Sloan's ribs where doubt and guilt had started to grow. Everyone has a price, Garrett. No. He shook his head, eyes never leaving hers, holding her gaze with the certainty of someone who had already lost everything that mattered, and therefore had nothing left to lose. Everyone doesn't. Some things are sacred. Some things matter more than money. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've never lost anything that couldn't be replaced. He walked to the door, then stopped without turning around, one hand on the handle, muscles tense across his shoulders. I know who your father was. I know what he did, what he built, and what he destroyed to build it. Sloane's blood went cold ice spreading through her veins despite the October sun streaming through the windows. What are you talking about? But Garrett was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving her alone with the files on her desk and the ghost she was only beginning to understand. That night, Sloane didn't go home. She sat in her office until midnight, reading through the box of documents again and again, looking for something she might have missed, some justification, some excuse, some way to reconcile the father she remembered with the man who had written those cold, calculating memos. She found nothing. No redemption, no explanation that made the theft anything other than theft, the destruction anything other than deliberate. At 2 in the morning, she called Walter Pierce. 82 years old now, confined to a wheelchair, living in a mansion in Grosse Pointe that cost more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. He'd been Robert Westbrook's best friend for 40 years, had been there at the beginning, had helped build Titan Core from nothing. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with age and sleep and something that might have been relief. Sloane, do you know what time it is? Tell me about Garrett Sullivan. Silence stretched across the line long enough that Sloane thought the call might have disconnected long enough that she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears counting seconds, like a clock counting down to detonation. Walter, tell me about Garrett Sullivan. I think you'd better come to my house. His voice had changed heavier now, weighted with something that sounded almost like relief, like a man who had been carrying a secret so long that the burden had become part of him. There are some things your father never wanted you to know. Things I promised him I'd take to my grave. I'll be there in an hour. Sloane Walter's voice stopped her just before she hung up, the warning of a man who understood what doors were and what happened when you opened them. Whatever you're planning to do, be careful. Some doors, once you open them, change everything that comes after. The door's already open, Walter. I'm just trying to see what's on the other side. She hung up the phone, grabbed her keys, and walked out into the Detroit night, leaving behind the box of documents that sat on her desk like evidence of crimes that couldn't be undone, sins that couldn't be forgiven, a foundation built on ruins that she was only now learning to see. Walter Pierce's mansion sat at the end of a long driveway lined with oak trees older than the automobile industry itself. Sloane had been here 100 times as a child, running through hallways that seemed to stretch forever, playing hide and seek in rooms filled with antique furniture and oil paintings of men who had built empires on the backs of assembly line workers. Now those hallways felt different, smaller somehow, haunted. Walter was waiting for her in the study, his wheelchair positioned near the fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across walls lined with books he'd probably never read. He looked older than she remembered, shrunken, diminished, like a man who had been carrying weight for too long and was finally ready to set it down. Sit down, Sloane. She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Tell me everything. Walter sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, from the place where men kept the things they regretted. Your father was my best friend for 40 years. I loved him like a brother, but I never said I was proud of everything he did. What did he do to Garrett Sullivan? Walter wheeled himself to a cabinet near the bookshelf. His hands trembled as he opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers that had yellowed with age, documents that should have been destroyed but weren't in evidence that guilt had preserved. 22 years ago, Garrett and Vivian Sullivan came to your father with something remarkable. A fusion reactor small enough to fit in the bed of a pickup truck. Clean energy, unlimited power, the kind of technology that could change the world. He held out the folder. Sloane crossed the room and took it, the paper heavy in her hands, heavier than it should have been. They were young, brilliant, naive. They thought your father would help them bring it to market. They thought they had found a partner. Sloane opened the folder. Inside were photographs she hadn't seen in the box at her office. Garrett and Vivian standing beside their prototype, smiling, hopeful, unaware of what was coming. Letters in Vivian's handwriting equations and diagrams that looked like prayers written in the language of physics. Contracts that had been altered, signed under duress, weaponized against the people who had trusted them. Your father saw an opportunity, a young couple with no money, no connections, no way to defend themselves, and technology that could be worth billions. He stole their patents. Walter's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair, knuckles white against the leather. He did worse than that. He destroyed them, used lawyers to bury them in litigation they couldn't afford, had them blacklisted from every research institution in the country, made sure no one would hire them, fund them, or believe them. Sloane felt her legs weaken. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, the folder still clutched in her hands. Vivian got sick about a year into the lawsuits. Cancer. They couldn't afford treatment and legal fees at the same time. Garrett tried to settle, offered to walk away, to let your father have everything just so he could focus on his wife. What did my father say? Walter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, the confession of a man who had been silent too long. He said no, said settling would be an admission of wrongdoing, said the Sullivans needed to be completely destroyed so they could never come back, so no one else would ever try. Sloane's throat tightened, bile rising. There's more. I can see it in your face. Walter closed his eyes. His whole body seemed to shrink into the wheelchair, becoming smaller, more fragile, a man collapsing under the weight of memory. He told me, his voice broke like glass. He told me that Vivian dying would solve the problem permanently, that without her, Garrett would fall apart, that the technology would die with them. Sloane stood up abruptly. The folder fell from her hands, papers scattering across the floor like evidence at a crime scene. He killed her. He didn't pull the trigger. But he made sure she died without seeing her work recognized, made sure she died believing she had failed. And you knew, all this time. You knew, and you said nothing. Walter's eyes were wet with tears now, an old man crying for sins he could have prevented but didn't. I was a coward, Sloane. Told myself it was just business, that there was nothing I could do, that your father was too powerful to challenge. You could have testified. I could have done a lot of things. Walter's voice rose, then fell again, the anger of a man who had spent 22 years being angry at himself. But I didn't, and I've lived with that shame every day since. Sloane walked to the window, her reflection ghostly against the dark glass. Outside, the manicured gardens of Walter's estate stretched into blackness, perfect and empty. Why did Garrett come back? Why is he working at Titancore? I don't know. I didn't even know he was there until you called. But if I had to guess. He paused, choosing his words carefully, each one placed like a stone in a wall. He's waiting for something. The Garrett Sullivan I remember wasn't the type to give up. He's been working on that reactor for 22 years. If he's hiding in your building, mopping your floors, there's a reason, and you might not like it when you find out what it is. What am I supposed to do with this? That's not for me to say. Your father made his choices. Now you have to make yours. Walter leaned forward at the wheelchair creaking. He was a monster, Sloane. His voice caught on her name, emotion making it rough. He was my father. He was a complicated man, brilliant, ruthless, capable of great kindness and great cruelty. Walter met her eyes, holding her gaze with an intensity that age hadn't diminished. The question is, what kind of person are you going to be? Are you going to bury this like he did? Or are you going to be better than him? Sloane didn't answer. She picked up the scattered papers, stuffed them back into the folder, and walked toward the door without looking back, the evidence of her father's crimes pressed against her chest like a wound. Walter's voice stopped her at the threshold. Sloane, she paused, one hand on the doorframe, not turning. For what it's worth, I think Vivian Sullivan would have liked you. The person you are becoming, I mean, not the person you were. The next morning, Sloane called Trevor into her office at 7 sharp. He arrived looking smug, that particular expression he wore when he thought he knew where a conversation was heading, when he believed he'd already calculated all the angles and positioned himself to benefit from whatever came next. Fire him, Trevor blinked, the smug expression fracturing. Fire who? Garrett Sullivan. The janitor. I want him gone by noon. For a moment, Trevor's composure slipped. Something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or satisfaction? The Harvard MBA, recalculating, adjusting variables, finding the advantage. What happened? Why the sudden urgency? I don't need a reason. I'm the CEO. I can fire anyone I want. Of course you can. Trevor nodded slowly in approval, mixing with calculation. Security will escort him out. Make sure he doesn't take anything from the building. And Trevor Sloan met his eyes, her voice cold enough to frost glass. This stays between us. No paperwork, no HR involvement, no record of why he was terminated. Just make him disappear. Trevor studied her for a long moment, that look she'd seen 1,000 times, the one that meant he was weighing how this decision would affect his own position, his own future, his own carefully constructed path to power. I'll handle it personally. He turned and walked out, and Sloan was left alone with the folder on her desk and the weight of what she'd just done, the choice she'd made to solve a problem the same way her father would have solved it, to bury truth under bureaucracy and pretend that made it disappear. 11:47. Sloan watched from her office window as two security guards in cheap suits escorted Garrett across the parking lot toward his truck. He didn't look back at the building, didn't make a scene, didn't shout or threaten or demand explanations. He just walked, calm, steady, like a man who had been expecting this moment for a long time, who had known from the first day he pushed a mop across that lobby floor that eventually someone would see him, recognize him, remember. He opened the truck door, slid into the driver's seat with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times, who knew every squeak of those hinges, every crack in that leather. The key turned, that sound again. That impossible, beautiful sound that haunted Sloane's dreams and made her wonder if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the only move that made sense. Then he drove away, the Ford disappearing around the corner, and she was left standing at the window, thinking she'd won, thinking that getting rid of him would make the problem disappear, would let her go back to running her company and living her life without ghosts whispering about foundations built on theft. She had no idea she'd just lit a fuse that would burn for exactly 6 days. 3 in the morning, 6 days later. Sloane's phone rang with the particular urgency that meant something had broken, some crisis that couldn't wait for business hours or polite timing. Dr. Nina Brennan's voice came through the line, tight as a wire, her Scottish accent thicker than usual, the way it always got when she was stressed. Turn on the news. Channel 4. Right now. Sloane fumbled for the remote, the bedroom dark around her, the city lights of Detroit visible through floor-to-ceiling windows that had cost more than most people's yearly salary. The television flickered to life, showing a press conference in progress. Simple podium, modest backdrop, minimal production values. But at the center, commanding attention, despite the humble setting, stood a man she recognized instantly. Garrett Sullivan, clean-shaven now, wearing a simple dark suit that probably cost less than Trevor's tie, but somehow made him look more substantial, more real, more dangerous than any executive she'd ever faced across a conference table. His eyes were clear and focused, the exhaustion replaced by something else, something that looked like purpose distilled into human form. I'm pleased to announce that Horizon Fusion Systems has received federal funding of $50 million from the Department of Energy for the development of our clean energy propulsion system. Sloane's heart stopped, actually stopped, the world going silent except for the sound of her own breathing, ragged and panicked. This technology, which my late wife Vivian and I developed together over 20 years ago, has the potential to revolutionize not just the energy industry, but transportation as a whole. The Helios reactor is a self-sustaining fusion system that recycles its own energy output. In laboratory conditions, our prototype has run continuously for over 2,800 hours without any external fuel source. Behind him, a screen displayed technical diagrams: magnetic confinement fusion, deuterium fuel cycles, energy recapture efficiency approaching 99.7%, numbers that shouldn't exist outside theoretical physics papers and fever dreams. We believe this technology can eliminate carbon emissions in power generation while simultaneously reducing costs and increasing efficiency. It's what Vivian dreamed of before she died. It's what we spent our lives building together. Reporters started shouting questions, voices overlapping in their urgency, the smell of blood in the water making them frantic. One cut through the noise louder than the rest. Mr. Sullivan, is it true that this technology was stolen from you 20 years ago? Is it true that Titan Core Energy acquired your patents through fraudulent means? Garrett paused. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, recognition or memory or both. There will be a time to discuss the history of this technology. For now, I want to focus on the future, on what the Helios reactor can do for the world. He looked directly into the camera, and Sloan felt like he was looking straight at her through the television screen, through the walls of her penthouse, into the places where she kept the things she didn't want to examine. My wife believed this technology could help people. That's what matters. That's what I'm here to honor. The press conference continued, but Sloan wasn't listening anymore. $50 million in federal funding. Technology that could make her entire company obsolete. And Garrett Sullivan, the janitor she'd mocked and humiliated and fired, was now the face of the future. But it was the reporter's question that made her blood run cold, that made her understand the fuse she'd lit was already burning down to nothing. Is it true that this technology was stolen from you? The world was about to find out everything. She picked up the phone and called Walter Pierce. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour, like he'd been expecting this call, waiting for Ben. You saw the news. What do I do? That depends on who you want to be, Sloan. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Walter's voice was firm, certain, the voice of a man who had spent 22 years preparing for this conversation. You can fight him. You can use every lawyer, every resource at your disposal to bury this story. Discredit him. Protect your father's legacy. It's what Robert would have done. It's what he did do 22 years ago. Sloan waited, knowing there was more, feeling it coming like a storm on the horizon. Or you can tell the truth. Acknowledge what was done. Make it right. That would destroy the company. It would destroy everything my father built. Your father built his empire on a lie, Sloan. On stolen technology and a dead woman's dreams. Is that really what you want to protect, Sloan? Didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The question hung in the air between them like smoke, visible and toxic. You're at a crossroads. The choice you make now will determine everything that comes after. Choose carefully. He hung up, leaving Sloan alone in the dark with the sound of Garrett's voice echoing in her mind, the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. For the next 2 weeks, Sloan tried to pretend nothing had changed. She went to board meetings, signed contracts, made decisions about acquisitions and expansions in quarterly projections. She smiled at investors and charmed partners and did everything a CEO was supposed to do. But everywhere she went, the questions followed. Her board members wanted to know about the Horizon Fusion announcement. Her lawyers wanted to know about the patent claims. Her PR team wanted to know how to respond to the increasingly aggressive media inquiries. And in the corners of every room, in the spaces between conversations, she could feel the walls closing in, the truth getting closer, the moment of reckoning approaching like a freight train on tracks she couldn't leave. Tuesday morning, the Detroit Free Press front page carried a headline that would change everything. Energy giant built on stolen dreams, how Titan Core destroyed a physicist's revolutionary invention. Angela Hartwell, investigative journalist, 42 years old, sharp as broken glass, with a reputation for stories that ended careers and sent people to prison. Her byline was a warning label, a promise that whatever came next would be thoroughly researched, meticulously documented, and impossible to deny. Sloan read the article on her phone while standing in her corner office, watching the sun rise over a city that had once trusted her, a city that was about to learn exactly what her family's fortune had been built upon. The story was thorough, devastating, perfect. Hartwell had interviewed former employees from Titan Core's early days, people who had left the company or been pushed out, people who had kept their silence for 22 years, but were finally ready to talk. She'd obtained internal documents through Freedom of Information requests, had tracked down witnesses, had built a case that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion. And she had Garrett Sullivan's first extended public statement since Vivian's death, his voice clear and certain and damning. My wife and I spent 18 years developing the Helios reactor. We believed it could help solve the climate crisis. We approached Robert Westbrook for funding and partnership. Instead, he stole our patents, destroyed our careers, and left us with nothing. Vivian died believing her life's work had been buried forever. I'm here to prove she was wrong. The article detailed the legal maneuvers Robert Westbrook had used to acquire the patents, the threats, the intimidation, the systematic destruction of Garrett and Vivian Sullivan's professional reputations. It talked about how Vivian had died 3 months after their final appeal was dismissed, her cancer untreated, because they couldn't afford both medical bills and legal fees, because Robert Westbrook had made sure they had to choose between survival and justice. It talked about how Garrett had disappeared for 16 years, grieving broken everyone, assuming he had given up. And then in the final paragraphs, Hartwell dropped the bombshell that would end Sloan's career. Sources within Titan Core Energy confirmed that the company recently terminated Garrett Sullivan's employment. Sullivan had been working as a janitor at Titan Core headquarters for 6 years, apparently without company leadership knowing his true identity. When CEO Sloan Westbrook learned of Sullivan's background, she allegedly ordered his immediate termination, hoping to prevent him from speaking publicly about the stolen technology. Sloan's phone started ringing. Board members, investors, her lawyers. The calls came faster than she could ignore them, a deluge of panic and anger, and the particular fear that came from watching fortunes evaporate in real time. By 9 in the morning, Titan Core stock had dropped 32%. By noon, 3 major institutional investors had requested emergency meetings. By 5 in the evening, Sloan's own board of directors had called for her resignation. She sat in her office as the sun set over Detroit, watching her empire crumble. In real time, watching the consequences of her father's actions finally come home to roost. Every news channel was running the story. Social media was exploding with outrage. Justice for Garrett was trending worldwide, the hashtag spreading like wildfire across platforms, across continents, across the collective consciousness of a world that loved underdog stories and hated the rich getting away with things. Commentators were calling it the biggest corporate scandal since Enron. The theft of the century, a cautionary tale about power and greed and what happened when brilliant people trusted the wrong partners. And the worst part, the part that made Sloan want to scream, was that every word in that article was true. Every accusation was accurate. Every detail was verified. Her father had stolen the technology. She had fired the man he had stolen it from. She was exactly what the world was calling her, a privileged heir who thought rules didn't apply to her family, who believed money could buy silence and power could rewrite history. 7 in the evening, Trevor knocked on her door without waiting for permission, his face carefully neutral, his survival instincts fully engaged. The board wants an answer by morning. They're prepared to vote you out if you don't resign voluntarily. What would you do if you were me? Trevor's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation mixing with the particular caution of a man who understood that saying the wrong thing could end his own career. Honestly, I'd resign, take a severance package, disappear for a year or two until this blows over. You're young enough to reinvent yourself, run away, strategic retreat. There's a difference. Sloan finally turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd become CEO, her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but something in them had changed, hardened or softened, or both. My father ran away from what he did. He buried it and pretended it never happened. Look where that got us. Look where it got me. Sloan, you can't fix this. The damage is done. Sullivan has federal funding, public sympathy, and a working technology. You have a failed replication effort and a PR nightmare. There's no path forward here. Maybe not for the company. Sloan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to glow in the twilight. But maybe there's a path forward for me. Trevor stared at her, confusion crossing his face like clouds across the sun. What are you talking about? I'm talking about doing something my father never did. Something I've never done. She turned back to face him, and her voice was steady, certain the voice of someone who had finally found solid ground after years of walking on quicksand, telling the truth. That night, Sloan didn't go home. She didn't go to the board meeting. She didn't call her lawyers or her PR team or anyone who might try to talk her out of what she was about to do. Instead, she drove for an hour, not really knowing where she was going, until she found herself parked outside a converted warehouse in southwest Detroit. The sign above the door read Horizon Fusion Systems in simple letters, and through the windows she could see lights burning, despite the late-hour engineers working machines, humming progress being made. The rusted F-150 was parked near the entrance, looking exactly as it had in the Titan Core parking lot, rust, and all carrying its secrets like scars. Sloan sat in her Mercedes for a long time, gathering courage. She wasn't sure she possessed, feeling the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her like atmosphere, like gravity, like all the years of her life leading to this single moment. Then she got out and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. She stepped inside and found herself in a workshop filled with equipment and prototypes and the organized chaos of serious innovation. The kind of place where people who actually cared about building things spent their time instead of talking about building things in conference rooms. A dozen engineers looked up from their work, surprised to see a stranger at this hour, surprised to see Sloan Westbrook walking into their space, uninvited, unannounced, unwelcome. And at the center of it all stood Garrett Sullivan, his hands covered in grease, his eyes fixed on Sloan with an expression she couldn't read, recognition mixing with something else, something that might have been curiosity or might have been the patience of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 6 years. Everyone out. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight, authority that didn't come from volume. The engineers exchanged glances, hesitated for a moment, then filed past Sloan without a word, leaving the workshop empty except for the two of them. In 30 seconds, the warehouse was silent, save for the hum of equipment, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the sound of two people breathing in the space between what had been and what might come next. Garrett wiped his hands on a rag, taking his time, letting the silence build, letting Sloan stand there in her expensive suit, feeling out of place and overexposed. How did you find this place? Public records. The federal grant documentation lists the address. And you came here because Sloan took a breath, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, every instinct she had screaming at her to run, to protect herself, to say whatever would get her out of this room safely. Instead, she told the truth. I came to apologize. Garrett's expression didn't change, stone carved from grief and time. I read the files. I know what my father did to you and Vivian. I know how he stole your work and destroyed your careers. I know he threatened you with lawsuits you couldn't afford to fight. I know he took everything. She felt tears building behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not yet, not until she'd said what she came to say. And I'm sorry, not just for what he did, for what I did. I mocked you in front of the whole company. I tried to buy your truck like it was just property. I fired you when you wouldn't give me what I wanted. Sloan paused, forcing herself to meet his eyes, to hold his gaze without flinching. I was becoming him. I was becoming exactly what he was, and I didn't even see it until it was too late. Is this supposed to make me feel better? Oh, this is supposed to be the truth, something my family hasn't been very good at telling. Garrett sat down on a workbench edge, studying her for a long moment, really looking at her the way people look when they're searching for something specific, something that can't be faked or performed. Your father came to me once, about a year after he took the patents. Vivian was already sick by then. We were drowning in medical bills. Couldn't afford lawyers. Couldn't afford to fight. His jaw tightened, the 22-year-old wound opening fresh. He showed up at our apartment in a $3,000 suit. Said he wanted to make things right. Offered us $200,000. Hush money. Sign a confidentiality agreement. Walk away. Never speak of the Helios reactor again. Sloan felt sick, actually physically sick, bile rising in her throat. What did you say? It wasn't up to me. Vivian was dying. We needed that money. We could have used it for treatment, for comfort, for more time together. His voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through the stone. You know what she said? She said some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth more than survival. If we take his offer, we'll be dead inside long before the cancer finishes me. He paused, and Sloan saw tears gathering in his eyes. Grief that time hadn't healed and probably never would. She died 3 months later. Never saw a dime of that money. Never saw her work validated. But she died with her integrity intact. She died believing that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. Sloan's tears were falling now, hot against her cheeks, shame and grief mixing together until they became indistinguishable. I can't give back what my father took. I can't bring Vivian back. I can't undo 22 years of injustice. Then why are you here? Because I can stop being him. I can stop being the person I've been. Every day, every choice, I can choose to become someone better. Garrett was quiet for a long time, the workshop humming around them, machines idling, the future waiting to be built or buried, depending on what happened in the next few minutes. Finally, he walked to a shelf and pulled down a thick binder, its pages yellowed with age, the cover worn from years of handling, from being opened and opened again like a prayer book or a map to somewhere that might not exist. You know what I remember most about Vivian? She believed in second chances. Not because people deserve them, most of the time they don't, but because she believed that people can change. That the worst version of ourselves doesn't have to be the final version. He held the binder out to Sloane, offering it like a test, like a gift, like a grenade with the pin already pulled. These are the original Helios reactor specifications, handwritten by me and Vivian. Everything your father couldn't steal because we kept it in our heads. Sloane stared at the binder like it might explode in her hands. Why would you give this to me? I'm not giving it to you. I'm testing you. Garrett's eyes were hard now, all the gentleness gone. Take this home, study it. If you can understand what Vivian and I built, not just the mechanics, but the philosophy, the heart of it, then maybe you're capable of being someone different than your father. He pressed the binder into her hands, the weight of it, surprising heavier than paper should be heavy, with hope and loss and the accumulated dreams of two people who had believed the world could be better. And if you can't, then you'll prove that you're exactly who I think you are. And this conversation will be the last we ever have. How long do I have? As long as it takes. Garrett turned back to his workbench, dismissing her without another word. Close the door on your way out. Sloane walked out into the Detroit night, clutching the binder to her chest like a life preserver, like evidence, like the key to a door she wasn't sure she had the courage to open. Behind her, the lights of Horizon Fusion glowed warm against the darkness, a beacon of what could be if she was brave enough to become someone new. She didn't go back to her penthouse, couldn't face the empty rooms, the expensive furniture, the view of a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger. Instead, she drove to a 24-hour diner off I-94, ordered coffee she didn't drink, and opened the binder. The first page hit her like a punch to the chest. Elegant handwriting, a woman's handwriting, Vivian's handwriting, words that had survived their author by 22 years. For Garrett, for our future, for everyone who needs light in the darkness. Sloane stared at that dedication for a long time, understanding, finally completely, that this wasn't just engineering. This was love. This was hope. This was everything her father had tried to destroy and failed. She turned the page and started reading. The mathematics were brutal, elegant, beautiful in the way that truth is beautiful when it's stripped of decoration. Sloane had studied engineering in college, had sat through countless technical presentations, had enough background to understand most of what crossed her desk. But this was different. This was genius on a level she'd never encountered, every equation building on the one before it, every diagram containing layers of meaning that took her hours to unpack. Vivian and Garrett hadn't just designed a reactor. They'd created a philosophy of energy, a new way of thinking about power and sustainability that made everything Sloane had ever learned seem primitive by comparison. By 3 in the morning, her head was pounding. She'd filled half a legal pad with notes, most of them questions she couldn't answer, problems she couldn't solve, gaps in her understanding that felt like chasms. The waitress had refilled her coffee 4 times and was starting to give her concerned looks, the kind of looks people give to those who seem lost or broken, or both. Sloane didn't care. She kept reading. Around 5 in the morning, she found a section labeled Core Principles in Garrett's handwriting, the letters precise and careful, the work of someone who understood that words mattered, that how you said something was as important as what you said. The Helios reactor is not about creating energy from nothing. That's impossible. It's about respect, respecting the energy that already exists, capturing what would otherwise be lost, treating waste as opportunity. Below that, in Vivian's elegant script, words that felt like they'd been written directly to Sloane across 22 years of silence. The universe doesn't have a scarcity problem. It has a wisdom problem. We throw away more than we use. Helios changes that. Sloane read those words 3 times, feeling them sink into her bones, into the places where she kept the truth she didn't want to examine, respecting the energy that already exists. She thought about her own life, the energy she'd wasted on appearances, on competition, on proving herself to people who didn't matter, the opportunities she'd thrown away because they didn't fit her image of success, the relationships she'd burned because maintaining them required effort she wasn't willing to give. She'd been living her whole life like a wasteful engine, losing more than she used, converting potential into heat and noise, and nothing of value. The sun was rising by the time she left the diner. She drove to a storage facility in Dearborn, rented the largest unit available, and started making calls. Dr. Nina Brennan answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy with sleep and confusion. Sloane, what time is it? I need equipment. Machine tools, diagnostic systems, welding gear, everything we use for prototype development. What the board is meeting in 3 hours. They're going to vote you out. You need to be there. I'm not going to the meeting. You have to be there. You have to defend yourself. No, I don't. Sloane's voice was steady, calm, certain in a way it hadn't been in years. I'm done defending who I was. I'm going to become someone worth defending. Sloane, you're scaring me. Good, I'm scaring myself too. That's how I know it's real. She hung up before Nina could argue, before doubt could creep in, before the old version of herself could reassert control and drag her back into the safe, familiar patterns that had defined her life for 45 years. Over the next 12 hours, Sloane transformed the storage unit into a workshop. She maxed out 3 credit cards buying parts and materials. She downloaded software, watched tutorial videos, read technical manuals until her eyes burned and her vision blurred. And she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten or slept or done anything except try to understand what Vivian and Garrett had built. At 2 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Titan Core Energy Board removes CEO Sloane Westbrook in unanimous vote. She read the headline, set down her phone, and got back to work. The first prototype took her 8 days to build. It was ugly, clumsy amateur. The welds were uneven, the connections imprecise. Her hands, soft from years of signing documents and shaking hands at cocktail parties, were blistered and cut and burned. She'd hit her thumb with a hammer hard enough to turn the nail black, had spent one entire night crying in frustration when a circuit board she'd spent 12 hours assembling turned out to be wired backward. But she kept going. She slept on an air mattress in the corner of the storage unit. She ate takeout from the Chinese place down the street sometimes, forgetting to eat at all until hunger made her hands shake. She showered at a truck stop 3 blocks away. She talked to no one except the delivery drivers who brought her supplies. On day 8, she connected the power cell and turned on her prototype. It ran for 4 seconds before the energy loop collapsed, and the whole system overheated, smoke rising from components that weren't designed to handle the thermal load she'd subjected them to. Sloane sat on the concrete floor, staring at the smoking wreckage of her work, her body aching, her hands raw, her pride in pieces. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night, in over a week hadn't seen daylight except through the storage unit's small window, hadn't spoken to another human being in days. But something had changed inside her. She wasn't angry, wasn't frustrated. What she felt was something she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. Determination. Pure, clean, uncomplicated determination. She went back to the binder, read the section on energy loop stabilization 3 more times, found a notation in Vivian's handwriting that she'd missed before, words that felt like they'd been left specifically for her to find at this exact moment. The key is patience. The system needs time to find its rhythm. Don't force it. Guide it. Guide it. Don't force it. Sloane thought about how she'd lived her whole life. Forcing, demanding, taking, never guiding, never waiting. Never trusting anything to develop naturally, to find its own path, to become what it needed to become instead of what she wanted it to be. She rebuilt the prototype, took her time, paid attention to the rhythm. Vivian described the harmony that existed between components when they were allowed to work together instead of being forced into submission. When she connected the power cell again, she didn't slam the switch. She eased it gently, like coaxing a frightened animal, like inviting instead of demanding. The reactor ran for 30 seconds, then 45, then 1 minute and 12 seconds before it failed. Progress. Real, measurable, undeniable progress. 3 weeks into her exile, Walter Pierce found her. He stood in the doorway of the storage unit, leaning heavily on a cane, staring at the chaos inside with the expression of a man witnessing something he'd never expected to see. My God. What have you done to yourself? Sloane didn't look up from the circuit board. She was soldering, her hands steady despite the exhaustion, despite everything. I'm learning. Learning what? How to destroy your life. The board has frozen your assets pending an investigation. Your accounts are locked. You're living in a storage unit like a homeless person. I'm not homeless. I'm working. Walter picked up the binder, flipped through a few pages with trembling hands, then set it down again like it might burn him. He gave you this. He's testing me. If I can build the reactor, he'll know I'm serious about changing. And if you can't, Sloane finally looked up, her eyes bloodshot, exhausted, but there was something in them that Walter had never seen before, something that looked almost like peace. Then I'll keep trying until I can. Walter sat down heavily on a crate that groaned under his weight, the wheelchair left outside because the storage unit was too cluttered to navigate. The board is talking about criminal charges, securities fraud, intellectual property theft, conspiracy. You're looking at potential prison time. Let them charge me. You should care, Sloan. I spent my whole life caring about the wrong things. Sloan set down the soldering iron and gave Walter her full attention the first time in weeks she'd really looked at another human being, really seen them. Stock prices, board meetings, what people thought of me, what my father thought of me, and where did it get me? I was the CEO of a company built on stolen dreams, and I didn't even know it. I was so busy protecting my image that I never bothered to look at what was underneath. She held up the circuit board, examining it in the fluorescent light, seeing the flaws and imperfections, the places where her inexperience showed the gaps between what she wanted to create and what she was capable of creating. This is real. This work. This challenge. For the first time in my life, I'm trying to build something instead of take something. And even if I fail, even if I go to prison, even if I lose everything, at least I'll know I tried to be different than him. Walter was quiet for a long moment, the silence of a man who had spent 22 years regretting his own choices, his own failures of courage. Your father would have called you a fool, I know. He would have said you're throwing away everything he built. He built it on lies. It was never worth keeping. Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, the paper thick and expensive, the kind used for important documents or significant gestures. Before I came here, I liquidated some of my own holdings. Cash, untraceable. It's not much, about 80,000, but it should keep you going for a while. Sloan stared at the envelope, then at Walter's face, seeing the tears there. The regret, the hope that maybe someone could do what he hadn't, could choose courage over comfort. Why would you do that? Because I failed your father once. I watched him do terrible things and said nothing. I won't make the same mistake with you. He pressed the envelope into her hands, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. Be better than him, Sloan. That's all I ask. He stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement, and guilt making every motion difficult. For what it's worth, I think Vivian Sullivan would have liked you. The person you are becoming, I mean. Not the person you were. Then he walked out into the afternoon light, leaving Sloan alone with her work and her binder, and the ghost of a woman she'd never met, but was finally beginning to understand. Day 42. The breakthrough came not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty, understanding arriving like dawn, were gradual and inevitable. Sloan had rebuilt the prototype 14 times. Each version got a little better, ran a little longer, failed a little less catastrophically. She'd learned to read Vivian's handwriting like a second language, to anticipate Garrett's logic, to understand the philosophy behind every design choice, every decision, every component, placement. And finally something clicked. Not a dramatic revelation, not a lightning bolt of inspiration, just a quiet understanding that had been building for weeks, pieces falling into place, one by one, until the whole picture became clear. The Helios reactor wasn't just about energy recapture, it was about harmony. Every component had to work with every other component, not against it. The system couldn't be forced or dominated. It had to be balanced, guided, respected, just like Vivian had written. Just like she tried to teach through pages and equations, and the accumulated wisdom of a life spent understanding how the universe actually worked instead of how people wanted it to work. Sloan made one final adjustment, a small change to the energy flow regulator, something she'd overlooked a dozen times before, a detail that seemed insignificant until you understood the whole system and realized that the smallest changes could cascade through the entire design. She connected the power cell, held her breath, and turned the key. The reactor started. Smooth, quiet, perfect. Sloan watched the diagnostic readouts, waiting for the collapse, waiting for the overheat warning, waiting for failure the way she'd learned to expect failure, the way 42 days of attempts had taught her to prepare for disappointment. 5 minutes passed, 10, 20, the energy loop held. The system recycled its own output, feeding back into itself, sustaining motion without external fuel, creating something close to perpetual motion, close enough that the difference didn't matter for any practical application. Sloan sat down on the concrete floor and cried. Not from exhaustion, though she was exhausted. Not from relief, though she was relieved. She cried because for the first time in her life she had built something real, something true, something that mattered to someone other than herself. And she cried because she understood now what Garrett had lost, what her father had stolen, what could never be returned. The woman who had written those notes, who had dreamed those dreams, who had poured her heart into this impossible vision, was gone. And all the money and power in the world couldn't bring her back. Sloane cried for Vivian Sullivan, a woman she'd never known and could never thank. And somewhere in those tears, she found the person she wanted to become. She called Garrett the next morning, her voice hoarse from crying and exhaustion, and too many days without real sleep. It works. Silence on the other end of the line long enough that she thought he might have hung up, might have decided she wasn't worth his time or attention or forgiveness. The reactor. I built it. It's been running for 14 hours. More silence. Then Garrett's voice came back guarded, but carrying something else too. Something that might have been surprise or might have been the first glimmer of hope. You actually did it. I want to show you. I want you to see that I understand what you and Vivian created. Not just the mechanics, the meaning, the philosophy. Why does that matter to you? Sloane gripped the phone tighter, her hands shaking, her voice breaking with emotion she didn't try to hide. Because I need you to see that I'm not my father. I need someone, anyone, to believe that people can change, that I can change. Garrett was quiet for so long that Sloane thought she'd lost him, thought she'd said the wrong thing or revealed too much, or asked for something he couldn't give. Where are you? She gave him the address, her heart pounding, her future balanced on the edge of whatever came next. I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't touch anything. Garrett arrived exactly 2 hours later, pulling the F-150 into the storage facility parking lot with the precision of someone who had spent 22 years treating that truck like it contained the most valuable cargo on Earth. Because it did. He stepped out, surveyed the storage unit with the practiced eye of an engineer, assessing a workspace, then walked inside without knocking. His gaze moved across the chaos with surprising approval. The scattered tools, the failed prototypes stacked in corners like monuments to perseverance, the sleeping bag on the floor. The empty takeout containers that told the story of someone who had forgotten that survival required more than work. Then he saw the reactor, still running, that smooth, quiet hum filling the small space, the diagnostic screens showing stable readings, the energy loop holding, with the kind of perfection that shouldn't exist outside theoretical models. Garrett moved closer, his movements deliberate, respectful. He examined every connection, every circuit, every component with hands that knew exactly what to look for, what mattered, what could fail. He checked the readings, ran his own diagnostics using the handheld device he'd pulled from his jacket, monitored the system for any sign of degradation or instability. 15 minutes passed in silence. Sloane stood against the wall, watching him work, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to break whatever spell was holding this moment together. Finally, Garrett turned to face her, his expression unreadable. How long did this take you? 42 days. And you built it alone. No help from anyone, just the binder, and a lot of trial and error. Garrett looked back at the reactor, something shifting in his face. Walls coming down that had been up for so long they'd become part of his architecture. This configuration, the adjustment you made to the flow regulator, it's not in the binder. Sloane nodded carefully, uncertain what this meant, whether she'd made a mistake or discovered something or both. I know. I figured it out on my own. It's based on something Vivian wrote in the margins about harmony, about every component working with every other component. I realized the original design had a small imbalance in the feedback loop. The change corrects it. Garrett stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw wonder cross his face, genuine surprise, breaking through the grief and anger that had defined him for so long. You improved it. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to make it work, no. Garrett shook his head slowly, his voice thick with emotion that he didn't try to hide. Vivian and I spent 18 years on this reactor. We knew that imbalance was there. We couldn't figure out how to fix it. We tried everything. Different materials, different configurations, different approaches. Nothing worked. He paused, looking at Sloane like he was seeing her for the first time. And you found the answer in 42 days. Sloane didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Just stood there in her stained coveralls with her blistered hands and her exhausted eyes waiting for whatever came next. Garrett walked to the binder, picked it up, flipped through the pages, slowly looking at Sloane's notes in the margins, her calculations, her questions and answers, written alongside Vivian's original text, a conversation across time and death, and the space between who people were and who they could become. She would have liked this. Vivienne, she would have liked seeing her work continue, seeing someone else understand what we were trying to do. I wish I could have met her. So do I. Garrett set down the binder and turned to face Sloane, fully the distance between them. Smaller now, the walls lower. You know what she told me once, right before she died? Sloane shook her head, not trusting her voice. She said the Helios reactor wasn't just about energy. It was about faith. Faith that the universe gives us what we need if we're wise enough to accept it. Faith that waste can become wealth, that loss can become gain. He paused, tears gathering in his eyes, 22 years of grief, finding new expression. She said that someday the right person would find our work and carry it forward. Someone who understood that technology isn't about power. It's about service, about helping people. I'm not sure I'm that person. No, you're not. Not yet. Garrett's voice was gentle now, almost kind. But you might be becoming her. And that's more than I ever expected. He reached out his hand, offering it like a bridge across an impossible distance. I need a partner. Horizon Fusion is growing faster than I can handle alone. The 50 million from the Department of Energy is just the beginning. We've got interest from power companies, from governments, from investors all over the world. He paused, letting the weight of what he was offering settle between them. I need someone who understands the technology, who believes in the mission, and who has the skills to navigate the business side of things. Someone who's willing to work harder than they've ever worked. Someone who's proven they can change. You want me to work with you? I want to give you a chance to prove who you are. Not your father's daughter, not the CEO who fired me, but the woman who spent 42 days in a storage unit destroying her hands and her reputation and her pride just to understand what two people build out of love. Sloane took his hand and shook it, her grip firm, despite the blisters, despite everything. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever met. I'll do whatever it takes to earn this. I know you will. Garrett released her hand and walked toward the door, stopping at the threshold without turning around. Shut down the reactor and pack your things. You start tomorrow. Sloane's voice stopped him before he could leave. Garrett, thank you for giving me this chance, for believing I could change. For the first time since she'd met him, something that might have been a smile crossed his face, small but real. Don't thank me yet. The hard part is just beginning. The next morning, Sloane arrived at Horizon Fusion at 3 hours before anyone else. She sat on the concrete steps outside, watching the sun rise over Detroit, feeling the weight of what she'd chosen settle onto her shoulders like a mantle she couldn't take off, didn't want to take off. The F-150 pulled into the lot at 6:47. Garrett got out and stopped when he saw her waiting. You're early. Couldn't sleep. That'll pass. He unlocked the door and gestured for her to follow. The workshop looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, more welcoming, a place where real work happened, instead of theoretical discussions in conference rooms about work that other people would do. Garrett led her through the main floor, past workbenches and diagnostic equipment, to a small office in the back corner that looked like it had once been a supply closet. This was supposed to be storage, but we needed the space. You'll share it with our CFO if we ever hire one. Sloane looked around, a metal desk, 2 folding chairs, an ancient computer, a single window looking out at the parking lot. The smallest office she'd ever seen, smaller than her penthouse bathroom, smaller than any workspace she'd occupied in 20 years of corporate climbing. It's perfect. Garrett raised an eyebrow, skepticism mixing with something that might have been approval. You used to have a corner office with a view of the entire city. I used to be a lot of things. Sloane set her bag on the desk and met his gaze without flinching. What do you need me to do? For the next 3 months, Sloane learned what it meant to build something from nothing. She answered phones when the receptionist was overwhelmed. She filed paperwork that the government required in triplicate. She negotiated with suppliers who didn't return calls because they'd never heard of Horizon Fusion and didn't care about clean energy or revolutionary reactors or the future of the planet. She learned to fix the coffee maker when it broke, to unclog the toilet when the plumber wanted $300 just to show up to stay late reconciling spreadsheets because they couldn't afford an accountant yet. The other engineers didn't trust her at first. They'd all heard the stories. The CEO who mocked their boss in a parking lot, the heiress who tried to steal their technology, the Westbrook who carried her father's sins like genetic inheritance. They watched her with suspicious eyes, waiting for the mask to slip, waiting for the real Sloane to emerge and reveal that this whole redemption act was just another scheme. Sloane didn't blame them. She just kept working. Showed up at 6, stayed until midnight, did whatever needed to be done without complaint or expectation of recognition. One night about 6 weeks in, she was alone in the workshop running diagnostics on a new prototype iteration when Garrett appeared beside her. The building was dark except for her workstation, everyone else long gone to families and lives that existed outside these walls. It's midnight. Go home. I want to finish these tests. The General Electric meeting is in 3 days. If we don't have solid data, the tests can wait. Garrett's voice was gentle but firm, carrying an authority that didn't come from volume. You've been here since 6 a.m. You've been here since 6 a.m. every day for 6 weeks. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? Sloan tried to remember. And couldn't the days blurring together into one long continuum of work and discovery and the particular exhaustion that came from caring about something more than yourself? Garrett pulled up a chair and sat down beside her close enough that she could smell motor oil and something else. Something that reminded her of honesty, of the kind of man who meant what he said and said what he meant. You're going to burn out. And then you'll be useless to everyone, including yourself. I can't stop. Sloane's voice cracked despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Every time I slow down, I think about everything I did, everything my father did, how many years you lost because of us, how Vivian died without seeing her work recognized. I can't just go home and watch TV and pretend everything's okay. Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering his words the way engineers consider designs, looking for the right approach, the path that would hold weight. Let me tell you something about Vivian. When she was dying, when we both knew she only had a few weeks left, I wanted to spend every minute at her bedside. I wanted to hold her hand and tell her I loved her and make up for all the time we'd lost fighting the lawsuits, fighting your father, fighting to survive. He paused, something raw crossing his expression. You know what she said? She said, Garrett, if you sit here watching me die, you'll die too. Not physically, but inside. You'll carry this grief like a weight until it crushes you. She made me promise to take breaks, to eat meals, to sleep, to live. Sloan felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. She said that guilt is just another form of selfishness. When we punish ourselves, we're making everything about us, our pain, our redemption, our story. But real change isn't about punishment. It's about service. It's about taking the energy we'd waste on guilt and using it to help someone else. How do you stop feeling guilty for something that can never be fixed? You don't stop feeling it. You just learn to carry it differently. Garrett met her eyes, holding her gaze with the certainty of someone who had walked this path before, who knew the terrain. Like the reactor, you don't eliminate the waste. You transform it. You turn it into something useful. The General Electric meeting changed everything. Thomas Hartley arrived with a team of engineers and executives, silver-haired and skeptical, carrying 30 years of energy industry experience, like armor against disappointment. They'd read Horizon Fusion's materials, impressive numbers, revolutionary claims. But numbers could be manipulated, and revolutionary claims were usually just marketing. We've seen your projections. Show us something real. Garrett looked at Sloan. Sloan looked at the F-150 parked in its usual spot in the corner of the workshop, weathered but familiar, carrying secrets that had survived 2 decades. Follow me. She led the GE team outside to where the Ford sat in morning light. Hartley's professional skepticism was evident in the way he wrinkled his nose at the rust, the way his engineers exchanged glances that said they'd seen this movie before. This is your demonstration. This is the original, the first Helios reactor ever built. It's been running for 22 years in this truck. Survived cross-country trips, Michigan winters, Detroit summers, never needed major repair, never needed fuel, never needed fuel. Hartley's voice carried the weight of 3 decades hearing impossible claims. That's quite a claim. Watch. Sloan opened the hood. The GE engineers crowded around, their doubts shifting to curiosity as they examined the components, the energy recapture systems, the regenerative loops, the harmonized flow regulators that Vivian had designed and Sloan had improved. Garrett connected monitoring equipment while Sloan climbed into the driver's seat. The leather welcomed her now, familiar after months of learning to drive this truck, learning to feel the reactor's rhythm through the steering wheel, through the pedals, through the vibration that came up through the floor. She turned the key. That sound filled the parking lot, pure and perfect, in alive the acoustic signature of something that shouldn't exist, but did that violated conventional understanding, but worked anyway. That proved the universe had more possibilities than textbooks acknowledged. The GE engineers stared at their tablets, watching data flow across their screens. Energy in, energy recycled, energy out. A loop that sustained itself, that grew stronger over time instead of weaker, that demonstrated principles they'd studied in theory but never seen in practice. One engineer whispered something that sounded like a prayer or a curse, or both. That's not possible. Sloan killed the engine and stepped out, her voice steady, professional. The CEO she used to be applied to the engineer she was becoming. And yet, there it is. The demonstration lasted an hour. Sloan answered every question, explained every component, walked through every technical detail without overselling or exaggerating, just telling the truth about what Garrett and Vivian had built and what it could do for a world that desperately needed alternatives to the energy systems that were burning it down. When it was over, Thomas Hartley stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the F-150 like he was witnessing the future take shape in rust and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let good ideas die just because powerful people wanted them buried. I've been in this industry 32 years. I've seen a lot of people promise miracles. Most of them were lying. A few of them were delusional. He shook his head slowly, awe mixing with the kind of recognition that came when everything you knew suddenly expanded to include new possibilities. But this is real. It's real, and we're ready to scale it. Hartley turned to face Sloan fully, his expression serious, the weight of what he was about to say evident in the way he held himself. I know who you are, Ms. Westbrook. I know what your father did, what you did. There are people at GE who think we shouldn't be anywhere near you or this company. Sloan's stomach tightened, but she held his gaze without flinching. What do you think? I think people can change. I think technology doesn't care about politics or history or family legacies. And I think this reactor could transform the entire energy industry. He extended his hand, the gesture formal binding. GE is prepared to offer a partnership agreement, $2 billion over 5 years in exchange for exclusive licensing rights to the Helios technology for power generation applications. $2 billion. The number hung in the air like smoke, like promise, like validation that what they were building mattered to more than just themselves. We'll need to discuss terms. And you should know this will require extensive due diligence. Lab tests, Department of Energy, reviews, safety certifications. We're talking 6 months minimum before any money changes hands. Sloan felt relief wash through her. Not a shortcut, not a quick fix, real partnership that would be earned through proof and patience. We understand. We want to do this right. Hartley's grip was firm, his eyes harder than steel, carrying the warning of someone who understood that trust once broken couldn't be rebuilt with money. Don't make us regret this. There won't be a second chance. 2 weeks after the GE deal was announced, Garrett's phone rang at 3 in the morning. Dr. Nina Brennan's voice came through the line, tight as a wire, her Scottish accent thicker than usual. We have a problem. Someone's leaking our technical specifications. Found fragments of our proprietary data on a Chinese energy company's internal servers. Data that could only have come from inside this building. Garrett paced the workshop at dawn, his expression darker than Sloan had ever seen it. When she arrived, he handed her a folder without preamble. Someone's trying to destroy us. The folder contained printouts, emails, financial records, legal threats to suppliers, permit applications mysteriously delayed, false information submitted to regulators. 3 of their best engineers had received job offers last week from Titan Core subsidiaries, offers too good to refuse, designed to gut Horizon's technical team. This isn't random corporate espionage. This is systematic destruction. Sloan flipping through the documents, her mind racing through possibilities, through the kind of corporate warfare she understood too well from her years at Titan Core. She stopped on a financial record, a wire transfer from an offshore account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. $2.3 million, dated 3 weeks ago, the same week the GE partnership had been announced. Trevor Nash. Garrett looked at her sharply, recognition crossing his face. Your father's right hand. He was there from the beginning. He helped orchestrate the original theft 20 years ago. He knows where all the bodies are buried because he helped bury them. Sloan's hands shook as she held the evidence. After my father died, Trevor stayed on to protect the secret, to make sure no one ever discovered what Titan Core was really built on. When I exposed everything when I came here, He must have decided to destroy Horizon before we could succeed, before we could prove my father wrong. Can you prove it? Give me 24 hours. Sloan spent the next day calling in every favor she had left. Former colleagues who still owed her, investigators who worked off the books, tech specialists who could trace digital footprints across continents through shell companies and encrypted communications, and the kinds of financial structures designed specifically to hide criminal activity. By midnight, she had her answer. Trevor Nash had been receiving payments from 3 different foreign energy companies for the past 6 months. He'd been meeting with Titan Core board members in secret, feeding them information about Horizon's technology strategy vulnerabilities. And he'd been doing it all from inside Titan Core headquarters, using his position to access systems and people who should have been off limits. We need to set a trap. Garrett studied her face, searching for something, maybe courage, maybe certainty. What kind of trap? A fake technical meeting. I'll mention a breakthrough that doesn't exist, something too valuable to ignore. If Trevor is our mole, he won't be able to resist. That afternoon, Sloan scheduled a video call with the Horizon engineering team, a call she knew Trevor would be monitoring through his contacts at Titan Core. She discussed a fictional breakthrough in reactor efficiency, a modification that could double power output while cutting costs in half, making it sound revolutionary, irresistible, exactly the kind of information that would force Trevor's hand. That night, she and Garrett waited in the darkened workshop, security cameras rolling, watching the feeds on monitors that showed every entrance, every shadow, every movement. 11:47. A side door opened. Trevor Nash stepped inside, moving quickly, professionally, clearly familiar with the layout from reconnaissance he had done before. He went straight to the main computer terminal and plugged in a USB drive. His movements efficient, practiced the work of someone who had done this kind of thing before. Sloan watched him download files, photograph documents, plant something on the server that looked like malware designed to corrupt their systems from the inside to destroy what he couldn't steal. Then she stepped out of the shadows, her voice calm, certain, carrying the authority of someone who had finally learned the difference between power and justice. "Hello, Trevor?" He spun around, his face going pale in the dim light, shock replacing the confidence he'd worn like expensive cologne. "Sloan, what are you? How did you? 22 years ago, you helped my father steal the Helios reactor technology from Garrett and Vivian Sullivan. You helped him bury their patents. You helped him destroy their careers." She walked closer, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. "And when Vivian died, when Garrett lost everything, you went home and slept soundly because you told yourself it was just business." Trevor's expression shifted, the shock fading, replaced by something harder, uglier, the mask finally coming off. "Your father was a great man, a visionary. He understood that progress requires sacrifice, that the strong survive and the weak get left behind." Trevor's voice grew more intense, true belief mixing with desperation. "I watched him build Titan Core from nothing, watched him make the hard decisions that weak men couldn't make. He gave me everything, my career, my future. And when he died, I made a promise to protect what he built, to make sure people like you and Sullivan didn't destroy his legacy with your guilt and your sentiment. My father was a thief and a liar. So are you." Trevor laughed, the sound hollow, empty of everything except contempt. "Wrong. You think you're any different? You think a few months playing poor in a storage unit makes you some kind of saint? You're a Westbrook. You've got his blood in your veins. His instincts, you're just too weak to use them. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just strong enough to choose something different." Garrett stepped out of the shadows behind Trevor, his voice quiet but carrying weight that made Trevor freeze. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Trevor whirled, but there was nowhere to go. Security guards had appeared at both exits, blocking escape routes. Police sirens were already audible in the distance, getting closer. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. My lawyers will." Sloan pulled out her phone and showed him the screen, the evidence displayed in neat rows, irrefutable, damning. "We have you on camera. We have your financial records. We have testimony from 4 of your contacts at the Chinese energy company you were feeding our data to. It's over, Trevor. All of it." Trevor's face contorted with rage, the professional mask shattering completely. "Your father would be ashamed of you." "Good." Sloan's voice was ice final, certain. "I'm ashamed of him too. That's the difference between us." The police arrived 15 minutes later. Trevor was handcuffed and led out of the building. his face red with fury, his protest growing louder and more desperate as reality set in, as the future he'd planned dissolved into the recognition that consequences existed even for people who thought they were too smart to get caught. When the door closed behind him, Garrett turned to Sloane, something like relief crossing his face. It's really over. The Trevor part is. The rest is just beginning. She looked around the workshop at the reactors they'd built, at the future they were creating together, at the possibility that maybe, just maybe, stolen dreams could be recovered, restored, made real. The next 6 months passed in a blur of laboratory tests, safety certifications, Department of Energy reviews, legal examinations, and board approvals. Horizon Fusion grew from a small workshop into something that couldn't be ignored, that attracted attention from power companies and governments and investors who saw the future taking shape in determination and validated science. But the thing that changed Sloane's life most wasn't the money or the recognition or the endless stream of meetings with executives who suddenly wanted to be her friend. It was the moment Fallon walked into the workshop on a Friday afternoon in early spring and found Harper showing a group of engineers how the reactor cooling system worked. See this gauge? It measures the thermal variance in the primary loop. If it goes above this line, the whole system shuts down automatically. Fallon, 14 and curious, stepped closer, her artist's eye seeing beauty in the technical precision. Did your mom help design this? Harper's expression softened grief and pride mixing together in the way they always did when she talked about Vivian. Yeah. My dad says she was the genius. He was just the guy who could build what she imagined. That's really cool. Fallon looked around the workshop, seeing it through new eyes. My mom can't build anything. She used to just sign checks and yell at people. Sloane, who had been working in her office, felt her face flush. She started to retreat, but Harper's voice stopped her. She's different now, though, right? Fallon turned to look at her mother standing awkwardly in the doorway, seeing someone she barely recognized, someone who had changed so completely in the past few months that the old version seemed like a stranger. Yeah, she is. She's really different. That evening, after the girls had gone home and the workshop had emptied out, Sloane found Garrett on the roof of the building sitting in an old lawn chair, looking up at stars barely visible through Detroit's light pollution. Mind if I join you? He gestured to an empty chair beside him. Sloane sat, pulling her jacket tighter against the spring chill, feeling something shift between them. Something that had been building for months, but neither of them had been ready to acknowledge. I saw Harper and Fallon together today, looking at the reactor, talking about Vivian. Harper doesn't talk about her mother much, not to me anyway. I think it hurts too much. 3 months old when Vivian died. She doesn't remember her face, only knows her through stories and photographs and the work she left behind. Fallon said I used to just sign checks and yell at people. Sloane laughed, but it came out bitter, self-aware. Did you? Yeah, I did. I was so focused on being my father's daughter that I forgot to be Fallon's mother. I missed dance recitals, forgot birthdays, left her with nannies who didn't know her middle name. She stared up at the sky, at the few stars strong enough to punch through the city's glow. I can't get those years back. I can't undo the damage. No, you can't. But you can be there now. That's what matters to kids. Not the past, the present, the showing up. They sat in silence for a while, the distant sounds of the city filling the space between them, sirens and traffic, and the low hum of a million lives being lived in proximity but isolation. I want our daughters to know each other, grow up together, be family. Garrett turned to look at her, moonlight catching in his eyes, making them seem lighter, younger, less burdened. What exactly are you saying, Sloane? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to build a life with you. I'm saying I'm tired of being alone, and I think you're tired too. She met his eyes, not flinching, not retreating. I'm saying I want to be your partner in everything, not just business. Garrett was quiet for a long time, the silence of a man who had been married to a ghost for 22 years, who wasn't sure he remembered how to love someone living. Vivian's been gone for 22 years. For 22 years, I've been married to her memory. I go to bed thinking about her. I wake up thinking about her. Every decision I make, I ask myself what she would have done. Sloane's heart sank, but she didn't look away. Let me finish. Garrett held up his hand, his voice gentle but firm. For 22 years, I've been married to a ghost. And for the first time, I think maybe I'm ready to let her rest. He reached out and took Sloane's hand, his grip warm, solid, real. I'm never going to stop loving Vivian. She's part of me. She always will be. But I'm starting to understand that loving her doesn't mean I can't love anyone else. His voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through the walls he'd spent 2 decades building. I'm starting to understand that she would want me to be happy, that she would want me to live. He paused, gathering courage. I love you, Sloan. I don't know when it happened. I didn't expect it. I wasn't looking for it, but it happened. And I'm done pretending it didn't. What do we do now? Now Garrett smiled, the expression transforming his face, making him look younger, lighter, like a man finally setting down weight he'd carried too long. Now we take it one day at a time. Now we show up for each other. Now we build something new together. And we tell our daughters that they're about to become sisters. The announcement didn't go the way either of them expected. They sat Harper and Fallon down in the Horizon Fusion break room on a Saturday morning, both adults nervous in a way they hadn't been since their first press conferences, since the first time they'd faced hostile questions from people who wanted them to fail. Girls, we have something to tell you. Garrett began, his voice careful, measured. You're together, we know. Harper cut him off, her voice matter of fact, the certainty of a 22-year-old who had spent her whole life observing human behavior with a scientist's eye. We've known for like 2 months. Fallon nodded, her artist's intuition confirming what her sister had observed. Mom, you look at Garrett like he's the last piece of pizza and you haven't eaten in a week. It's kind of obvious. And Dad smiles now, like actually smiles. He hasn't done that in as long as I can remember. Harper stood up and walked over to her father, putting her hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle, carrying forgiveness and permission and hope. Dad, you've carried grief like it was the only thing keeping you alive. I've watched you give up on everything except the reactor. And me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. Mom would want you to be happy. You told me she whispered it to you right before she died. That if you ever found someone who made you feel alive again, you should let yourself feel it. She looked at Sloan, meeting her eyes directly, the assessment of someone deciding whether to trust. Mom would have wanted you to be someone brave, someone who could understand what you've been through, someone who could love my dad the way he deserves. Harper paused, choosing her words carefully. I think my mom would have liked you, Sloan. Not who you were, but who you're becoming. Fallon stood up and walked over to her own mother, her movements hesitant but determined, bridging the distance that years of neglect had created. I've been so angry at you for so long. Angry that you were never there. Angry that you cared more about the company than about me. Angry that I had to find out what kind of person my grandfather was from the newspaper. Sloan felt shame wash over her, hot and heavy, deserved. But then I watched you change. I watched you give up everything. The money, the penthouse, the power, because you wanted to be better. I watched you work in a storage unit until your hands bled. I watched you apologize to the whole world for something you didn't even do. Fallon's voice softened, forgiveness mixing with hope. That's not nothing, Mom. That's everything. That's the kind of person I want to be someday. The kind of person who can admit they were wrong and actually change. She looked at Garrett, seeing him clearly for the first time, seeing past the janitor her mother had mocked to the man underneath. And if he makes you happy, if being with him makes you more like the person you're becoming and less like the person you were, then I'm happy too. Harper grinned at Fallon, something mischievous crossing her face. So I guess this makes us sisters. I guess it does. Cool. I've always wanted a sister, someone to blame when things go missing. Fallon laughed, the sound genuine, unguarded. I always wanted a sister too, someone to help me gang up on the parents. The four of them stood there in the break room of a workshop in Southwest Detroit, a family forged from tragedy and transformation, and the stubborn refusal to let the past define the future. Garrett reached out and took Sloan's hand, his grip certain, solid, real. I think this is going to work. I know it is. The wedding was small, intimate, the kind of ceremony that focused on promises instead of spectacle. Walter Pierce walked Sloan down the aisle, tears streaming down his ancient face, his wheelchair left at the back of the venue because he'd insisted on standing for this, on being part of something good, after years of complicity in something terrible. Dr. Nina Brennan was there, having left Titan Core to join Horizon Fusion full-time, her Scottish brogue thick with emotion as she watched her boss marry the woman who had once fired him. A handful of engineers who had believed in the mission from the beginning filled the modest venue, their presence a testament to loyalty that transcended corporate politics. Harper and Fallon served as joint maids of honor, wearing matching dresses they had picked out together during 3 hours of shopping that had bonded them more than any conversation could have, that had transformed them from strangers into sisters through the shared experience of trying to find something that didn't make them look ridiculous. Garrett's vows were simple, direct, the words of an engineer who understood that precision mattered more than poetry. Vivian taught me that love isn't about holding on to the past. It's about having the courage to build something new. Sloan, you've shown me that people can change, that broken things can be repaired, that waste can become wealth. I promise to spend every day of my life helping you transform into the person you want to become. Sloane's vows came through tears. She didn't try to hide emotion, breaking through the control she'd spent 45 years perfecting. Garrett, you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. You taught me that real value comes not from what you inherit, but from what you build. You showed me that integrity matters more than success, that truth matters more than comfort. I promise to spend every day of my life honoring Vivian's legacy and creating our future. The kiss that followed felt like the beginning of something new, something that had been impossible a year ago, something that only became possible because two people chose to be different than who they'd been, to build instead of destroy, to forgive instead of holding grudges that would have poisoned them both. 3 years after the wedding, on a clear October morning, the first commercial power plant using Helios reactor technology went online in Detroit. Garrett and Sloan stood on the observation platform with Harper and Fallon, all four holding hands, watching history unfold in the space where an abandoned auto plant had once stood, where rust and failure had given way to something that looked like hope. The massive facility stretched across acres of land, gleaming towers and control rooms, and the kind of infrastructure that represented billions of dollars of investment, thousands of jobs, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, humanity could solve problems it had created. 100,000 homes would receive clean, unlimited power starting today. Zero emissions, virtually zero cost after the initial infrastructure investment. The dream Vivian had died believing was buried forever, made real by the man who had loved her and the woman who had learned to honor her memory. The governor was there. Senators, the Secretary of Energy, cameras from every network in the country. But Garrett wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking at the dedication plaque mounted near the entrance, bronze letters catching the morning sun. The Vivian Sullivan Clean Energy Center. Sloan had insisted on the name, had fought for it when politicians wanted something more generic, more politically useful, had refused to compromise on the one thing that mattered more than money or recognition or legacy. This is her achievement, her legacy. The world needs to know who made this possible. Now Garrett stood in front of that plaque, reading his wife's name in letters that would outlast them all, feeling her presence not as grief but as completion, as the fulfillment of a promise made in a hospital room 25 years ago. She's here. She's finally here. Sloan squeezed his hand, her voice soft, certain. She was always here. We just couldn't see her. Garrett stepped to the podium. As the crowd quieted, hundreds of faces turned toward him, waiting for words that would mark this moment, that would explain what they were witnessing. Nearly 30 years ago, my wife Vivian and I started working on an impossible dream. We wanted to create energy that respected what already existed, to capture what would otherwise be lost, to treat waste as opportunity. His voice was steady, strong, carrying across the assembled crowd. We were told it couldn't be done. We were told we were crazy. We were told to give up, go home, find something practical to do with our lives. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the politicians, at the ordinary people who had gathered to witness something extraordinary. Vivian never gave up. Even when we lost everything, even when she was dying, she believed that someday someone would carry our work forward. She believed that the universe gives us what we need if we're wise enough to accept it. Garrett's eyes found Sloan in the crowd, holding her gaze across the distance. She was right. The universe gave me exactly what I needed, not when I wanted it, not how I expected it, but exactly when I was ready to receive it. He stepped back from the podium, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. This plant is named for my wife, but it was built by all of us. Everyone who believed that the future could be different from the past. Everyone who chose to transform instead of destroy. Everyone who understood that the most valuable things in life aren't always visible. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look past the surface and see the truth underneath. The crowd erupted in applause, but Garrett barely heard it. He walked off the stage straight to Sloane, pulled her into an embrace that lasted longer than was probably appropriate for a public event, not caring who saw or what they thought. Thank you for seeing me, for believing I was worth seeing, for giving me a reason to keep going when I'd forgotten how. Sloane held him tighter, her voice breaking with emotion. You gave me the same thing. We saved each other, Garrett. That's what partners do. Harper and Fallon appeared beside them, the daughters who had lost and gained and learned to forgive, who carried forward dreams their parents had built and rebuilt and refused to abandon. The four of them stood together, a family built from loss and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let good dreams die, watching as the massive turbines began to turn, as clean energy started flowing into homes across Detroit, as Vivian's vision finally became reality. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the photographs and the handshakes with politicians who wanted to associate themselves with success, the family walked back to the parking lot together. The rusted F-150 that had started it all sat in a place of honor near the plant entrance, preserved behind glass as a monument to perseverance. But parked beside it was a new truck, modest and unpretentious, carrying a next-generation Helios reactor under its hood, ready for whatever came next. Some things changed. Some things stayed the same. Garrett opened the driver's door, then stopped, turning to face his family, his voice carrying the weight of memory and the lightness of hope. You know what Vivian told me once, right before she died? Everyone fell silent waiting. She said, Garrett, some revolutions start with a bang. Others start with a whisper. But the ones that matter most start with a single choice. A choice to believe that tomorrow can be different from today. A choice to build instead of destroy. A choice to love instead of hate. He looked at Sloane, at Harper, at Fallon, at the family that had risen from the ashes of tragedy. She was right. This revolution didn't start with money or power or technology. It started with a choice. My choice to keep going when I wanted to give up. Sloane's choice to become someone different than her father. Our daughter's choice to carry the dream forward. He turned the key and that perfect sound filled the air, music and physics, and hope combined into frequencies that proved the impossible was just the difficult that hadn't been attempted yet. Every revolution is just a series of choices, and we get to make new ones every single day. The truck pulled out of the parking lot and onto the street, four people driving toward tomorrow carrying a dream that had survived theft and tragedy and 22 years of darkness, a dream that proved the most powerful force in the universe isn't money or technology or even love. It's the simple, stubborn, world-changing choice to become better than you were before.